as we're joined by UNC law professor Michael Gerhardt because we're talking about Israel and Iran, the war, the conflict that's escalating there. And Mr. Gerhardt, you just returned back from Israel, and from my understanding, you were actually there as some of the retaliatory strikes were being lobbied on Israel. So you're back home now, obviously. What is this? What was that situation like? I mean, you were there when this was kind of coming to a head.
So we had been in Israel for 2 weeks, teaching and meeting with scholars and other sort of people in the government, and actually participating in protests, among other things. But the Thursday, our last Thursday there, is when Israel launched its attack. And it's fair to say, I think everybody, certainly around us and everybody in Israel, did expect some kind of retaliation. That, unfortunately, that's the dynamic in that region. Come Friday, we were still trying to make plans to leave the country. Our flights got canceled, so we had to come up with a plan to sort of drive to Amman, Jordan, which we were going to do on that Saturday, but we had to survive between that Friday and Saturday. And Friday night Friday, particularly in the afternoon, and more so in the night, the bombing started. And these are ballistic missiles coming into Israel. And my wife was in one part of town, I was in another part of town. We each sort of got ourselves into bomb shelters and tried to keep in touch that way. It certainly felt to me when a ballistic missile exploded, what seemed to be above me, my whole building, including my bomb shelter, shook. And then my wife fortunately made it all the way to our place, so we could be in the bomb shelter together. And all that night, all Friday night, there was just bombing. So we basically didn't sleep. And the smartest thing to do in that circumstance is just stay in the bomb shelter. So we survived that Friday, and then Saturday we started to drive into Amman, and we were able to fly out of Amman, Jordan, on Sunday.
I mean, the description, of going through that experience, I mean, it stops your heart to think about. And I mean, you touched on something that, keep in mind, of course, we know this from following this day by day, but I feel like the cycle on this story is moving quickly. It seems like there are new developments, but I remember kind of around the time frame that you were just describing there was a lot of talk about how Americans and or other folks who were trying to get out could get out because there were closures at the airport. So could you walk us through that situation of just trying to figure out how you were going to get home? I mean, obviously you were able to do so inevitably, but I mean, that was a big concern for a long time and likely is for still so many people.
Yes, you're absolutely right. In fact, we still get texts and emails from friends or other people we met in Israel on sort of how they can get out. I think it's becoming a little easier right now than it had been when we were there, which is now more than a week ago. So on Friday, I think the last Friday we were there, in the morning, we got news that Ben Gurion Airport closed, which meant our Delta flight got canceled. We were already thinking of alternative plans. I just shut off a couple emails to the embassy. I didn't expect much, and that low expectation was justified when later in the day the U.S. Embassy sent out a message that we are not going to help Americans leave Israel, which basically meant, of course, we were going to be on our own. And I think we're already reconciled to that. Fortunately, we have some friends in Israel, including a really good friend who is pretty well connected in terms of the routes both into Israel and out of Israel. And with his help, we were able to schedule on Friday a series of drivers who would then sort of take us from Tel Aviv to Eilat, which is in southern Israel, and then we crossed over the Jordan border around Petra, and then we were met by a different driver who was able to then drive us from southern Jordan to northern Jordan, or where Amman is. And Amman obviously is a very large city of roughly 4 to 5 million people. And its airport was both closing and opening. So the night we arrived, Saturday night, it was open. But then it closed later in the night. Sunday morning, first thing, it was closed. And so we were not entirely sure what to do, but we talked to some people at the hotel and who told us they thought the best thing for us to do was just simply take a car to the airport, and if the airport opened, then we'd be able to fly out. The advice we got was also, if we don't go at that point Sunday morning, and the flight did take off, we'd probably never make it. So we went to the airport. I was tracking the airport itself on the drive, and it opened roughly middle of our drive to the airport. We got to the airport, went through 4 security stations in Jordan, considerably more cumbersome than we experience here in the United States. Plane took off about an hour late, but it did take off, and fortunately, it landed, and we got home. I think we were maybe 3. There were probably no more than 3 or 4 Americans on that flight, and it was full.
I mean, did you ever anticipate that you would have to go through all of these measures just to make it back? When you first set out on this trip, I mean, and looking back now on what you went through to get home and all that you experienced while you were there, I mean, did this trip turn out so much different than you thought?
I would say yes and no. We certainly didn't expect that Israel would be attacking Iran, or Iran would be retaliating during the time we were there. But I should note that the time we were there, Israel was still in a state of war, but its war hadn't yet totally focused on, or singularly focused on, Iran. One thing about being in Israel is you are fully aware of the possibility of attacks. Also, however, you're around people who have been through this kind of thing before. So everybody around you is quite calm, and that actually helps you stay calm. And I think we were calm and very focused throughout. And I will say we got tons of messages while we're there from people who lived there and lived in the region, asking if we were okay, did we get out okay, and so on. And so there's a sense of, for lack of a better word, support that you have under conditions like that, which maybe helps your mindset.
I guess on that note, since you are still in contact with folks back there, and you kind of alluded to this fact that there is a mindset, maybe an acknowledgement of the realities of the tensions that are ongoing and constant in that region. Do you feel like that mood is still the same at this point? Do you think things have maybe evolved, in the last several days? Do you think that folks might still be feeling calm and collected?
It's a good question. Our impression has been, and we were also in Israel last summer, but our impression last summer and this summer has been that Israeli people, generally speaking, are traumatized. They got traumatized on October 7th, and there's really been no let up under those circumstances. The military is quite exhausted because there are only so many people they can they've got available in reserves and otherwise, sort of to fight the war. So you get this sense of almost a fatalistic sense from a lot of people, which is, okay, if today's the day I go, so be it. But we're going to fight and try and survive as best we can in the short term. And so I think there was, we did expect, or it was not surprising, something might happen while we're there, because it is that part of the world. It's just, it happened in a different way than we expected. And then we had to kind of hustle, but with the support of friends, we were able to make it back.
I'm just curious, as someone who clearly has connections and ties to the region and the area, how closely you've been watching since then, all of the developments that have taken place, including the U.S. actions that we saw over the weekend, the decision to make those strikes on suspected nuclear sites. Have you been following that very closely? And if so, what are your thoughts on how this is playing out at this point?
Yes, I have been following it closely, in part because we still have some close friends, and my wife has family there, so we want to, we just want to make sure everybody's okay and safe, and they have been. In terms of I guess the military sort of actions, one thing that is clear from our experience, it's one thing if another country is shooting drones at Israel, because Israel has this famous dome that helps protect it from drones. The dome works with ballistic missiles, but not quite as well. So imagine that a ballistic missile is somehow damaged or explodes in middle of air. You still have the missile itself, which is going to land somewhere, and that could be very dangerous. So we kind of followed it to get a sense of, okay, how safe is it? How are things changing? I think the U.S. involvement was a bit of a surprise to the extent that it was, but I think with the current mindset of the current government in Israel, they are very much sort of in a war mentality. And I can't say that most Israelis support that. But on the other hand, you could also say in the United States, a lot of people don't support what the administration is doing. It's somewhat paralleled in Israel.
Well, I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this, just given the fact that you are a law professor with UNC, and we know that one of your foci is constitutional law. There's been a lot of dialogue over whether there was some sort of violation with the president ordering these strikes over the weekend. We know, just as several moments ago, House Speaker Mike Johnson basically defended the president's decision, saying that it's within President Trump's Article 2 powers as commander-in-chief to order this. But we see folks who are not quite feeling the same way. So I'm just curious what your expertise tells you about the situation and this particular thread and dialogue that is a big topic right now with this conflict.
I appreciate the question. I think one challenge of being a constitutional law professor right now is to hear things that are just dead wrong, and from people who should know better. The quote you just gave from the Speaker Johnson, or the reference to him, he's completely wrong. And it's not just me speaking. The Supreme Court in the early 1950s decided a very significant case called the Steel Seizure case, involving President Truman's seizure of control of the nation's steel mills. The Supreme Court struck down his executive order. And in doing so, the Supreme Court declared that a president has no inherent emergency power. So much for Speaker Johnson's comments. Beyond that, the Supreme Court said a president's power must derive from one of two places: the Constitution itself or a statute. So in the current circumstance, there's nothing in the Constitution itself which would authorize a president to take unilateral action. The Supreme Court has never acknowledged that that would be permissible, and our best understanding of the Constitution is that it wouldn't be permissible. The president's job is to implement congressional policy, not to be developing the policy himself in the absence of congressional action. The question in President Trump's case is there a statute or a resolution that somehow supports his actions in this instance? And so far, what has struck me is that the administration has been dead silent about that. You would think if it had authority, it would just trot it out. But it doesn't, it's not trotting any authority out, which does reinforce the suspicion that this must be unconstitutional.
Now, I mean, coincidentally, and you won't be able to see this on your end, just based on the technological setup we had, but we just put up a little box in the corner of our screen. It's actually a live feed of House Speaker Mike Johnson speaking at this very moment. He was actually talking about this topic. And I was just curious to get your take, because we heard him trying to make comparisons. For example, this is another quote from him. President Biden ordered strikes on Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. President Obama launched an 8-month-long bombing campaign in Libya to oust Gaddafi. President Clinton initiated air patrols and airstrikes in Bosnia and a bombing campaign in Yugoslavia. So he says, this is a continuation of the quote, every one of those actions were taken unilaterally and without prior authorization from Congress. Do you feel like those are comparable comparisons? Or, I mean, I guess, what's your take? Do you have a response to that particular statement?
Well, I have two responses. The first is the speaker is engaging in this sort of view, or this practice, which I guess has been pretty popular with him and others, and that is to immediately point to other people doing something wrong and then claiming somehow that ought to give his president some authority. That doesn't work in constitutional law. We also learned at a very early age, 2 wrongs don't make a right, 5 wrongs don't make a right. So I find that argument to be very, very weak. But the other thing is the examples he used are probably not the best examples he could have found, because each of the presidents you just mentioned had some kind of congressional authorization or treaty or other law that they were acting pursuant to. That's not the case in this situation. Obviously, after 2001, a lot of presidential actions were undertaken consistently with a joint resolution that had authorized the use of force in response to the attacks on 9/11. So that covers a lot of the presidential activity post 9/11. And otherwise, I think that it's what Speaker Johnson has not said, and this is telling, is what the specific authority is for President Trump to do what he did. That's the simple question. It should have a simple answer.
Before we get to our next question, because this discussion is super interesting, and I know we have a lot of viewers here on Live Impact News who want to continue this dialogue. So I just want to point out that we're about to transition to our 4 o'clock newscast here on WCNC Plus. Our discussion here with Michael Gerhardt is going to continue on our secondary channel. This is on demand here on WCNC Plus. So basically go to the main console and select the secondary channel, and you can continue to listen in on this dialogue here. My next question here for you, Professor, given all that you've said about your thoughts on the actions taken over the weekend and your belief, you feel like this was not within the president's frame of power, where do we go from here, I guess? Because we hear a lot of folks in Congress who are now begging for information. They feel like they say that they're trying to get information, that they want to know how this was done. That's a lot of the dialogue that we're seeing from folks who oppose this decision that was being made. But what sort of checks and balances might be in place to I guess, correct things if, as your opinion was, that this was not done correctly?
Well, I think the main thing is that a president's constitutional duty is to enforce or implement the policies that Congress has made. And the president has a lot of that gives the president a lot of authority to have that duty. However, in this instance, Congress hasn't had a chance to formulate a policy. And this is Constitutional Law 101. Congress makes the law, which means Congress makes the policy. A president does not make the policy. It doesn't matter to me who the president is. If a president is acting unilaterally without congressional support or authorization to use force, that president is in all likelihood acting unconstitutionally.
So as this situation continues to develop here, I'm just curious what you as an expert in this field, will be looking out for to see what happens next. Who will you be watching for action, and what might you expect to see coming next, in this specific dialogue that we're seeing over powers of the president?
I would personally sort of love to see Congress using its own power and Congress getting involved rather than sitting on the sideline and letting the president usurp its power. There's a lot of stuff that Congress could be doing, for including not just hearings, but actions. And so it's just curious to me why we're not seeing that. Apparently, the Senate's holding a hearing on Joe Biden's mental capacity when he was president. Strikes me as a more timely thing to think about. Maybe we should have a hearing on the current conflict. This is all compounded by the fact when the president's representatives or officials, the people who work for the president, show up in Congress, their presentations usually are very disappointing because they just are partisan talking points, and they seem to really think their main job is to attack Democrats and be disdainful of Democrats in Congress. I'd like to see everybody remember that they have a duty to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Yes, members of Congress are partisan, but it'd be great to see them do their jobs, and great to see them do their jobs not so much for the sake of partisanship, but for the best interests of the American people.
If we can go back to your recent trip to Israel, I mean, obviously there's a travel advisory out for folks who are traveling. I mean, pretty much it sounds like everywhere at this point there are some concerns. Thoughts on staying in touch with folks. I mean, it seems like you're probably not going to get back there anytime soon. How do you go from here as far as keeping in touch with the people that back there and how they're doing?
Oh, I'm somewhat fortunate in that, and I guess we're all somewhat fortunate that we have these means, including WhatsApp and texts and emails, which allow us to be able to communicate rather easily with people who share those sort of programs. So communicating has remained very easy at this end. You're right, we are not going back anytime soon. I think one thing I would certainly offer or suggest to other people is to take warnings about travel very seriously, particularly sort of once you're outside the United States, and I wouldn't say necessarily in enemy territory, but you're outside the United States in a place where war is happening, you're not going to necessarily be able to rely on the embassy to help you. It certainly didn't help us at that time. And so I would say just try not to go anywhere you don't have an exit plan regarding.
Michael Gerhardt, we appreciate your time here on Live Impact News. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with before we wrap things up this afternoon?
Just happy to be back in North Carolina and looking forward to teaching in the fall.
All right. Thank you so much, and glad that you made it home safely as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you.